went through the stormwater drains into those ponds was still an issue. It's our preliminary evaluation that there is no issue there, but it has to be closed out. And that's an issue that's been raised a little bit in the comments on the ENF that was submitted for the development agreement. So it's probably time to get that wrapped up and closed out. This is related to contamination that would have taken place years ago before floor drains were closed. It's nothing that's taking place right now. And it's just a function as to whether anything that's remaining in the sediments at the bottom of the pond is still a threat to anything, any of the organisms within the pond. There's no indication that they are, but we need to do some final tests to be sure and do a final round of analysis of those sediments.
What about the plume? What's the status of that plume?
The plume, there's one main plume that we've been remediating for a number of years that began from a floor drain at the old Provincetown Boston Airlines hangar that's now Cape Air. That's been cut off so it can no longer migrate. And there's one area under the north ramp where there's limited oxygen that gets down into the groundwater, and that's needed to help do the final remediation of that area. But there's still some material that's above standards. It's clean at the source, it's been cut off, and it's cleaned down gradient from that source. This area is probably a couple hundred, maybe 300 feet long and maybe about 80 or 90 feet wide. And that's an area that's the CIP item right before this, that's to try to go and get that so you're not spending money on an annual basis to monitor it, but that you spend a little bit more money at one time to go in and clean it up and close the whole thing out.
You said not to monitor it? I thought we were going to monitor it.
We are monitoring it. And the question is, do you just continue to monitor it and over time expect to slow degradation and remediation of what's there? Or do you take a few years of that monitoring cost and use it for an active remediation system and go in and clean it up once and for all?
What do you mean by cleaning it up? I thought that we not to disturb it so that we won't do any of this cleaning up. I mean, there's really,
two separate
between what
things
you're
going on
saying and there's some discrepancy here as
There's
to
two-
clean up this and what do you mean by cleaning up? You mean really going in there and getting rid of that so that we're going to disturb the plume.
Well, there's two separate items here. There's the ponds, where there is no plume associated with those ponds. There's some heavy metals and some heavier hydrocarbons at trace levels that are sitting within the sediments at the bottom of the pond. I would not recommend digging those up because I think we create more harm than we create good, and there's no evidence that what remains there is a threat to anything. When you said plume, I was thinking about the groundwater plume that remains underneath the north ramp. Very separate item. There's no connection between that and the ponds.
So there's no plume up at those two ponds?
No.
Okay. It's a misunderstanding that I've had all along.
And the plume is what? You just oxygenate what's there to speed up the...
There's some techniques you can go in there to increase the level of oxygen by injecting compounds that contain a lot of oxygen, do some additional treatment in those areas, and actively fight it instead of watch it move and degrade on its own. It's trapped in that area, and instead of just having an annual monitoring and reporting process that could go for a number of years, try to take some of that investment and up front go in and basically wipe this out once and for all and be done. And be able to say that the plume is now 100% gone.
Are you talking about correcting the problem by removing the soil or using the oxygen system?
By injecting a system that would inject chemicals down into groundwater.
That's how you
The plume is about 30 feet below ground, so excavation under that ramp is not feasible. It wouldn't make sense. And we don't need to do this correctly.